I was having a peaceful Saturday afternoon, enjoying the rare moments when my driveway is clear, and I can sit in the shade with a cold drink. My classic car, a cherry red 1967 Mustang, had just been polished up and was looking shiny as ever. It's been in the family for years, passed down from my grandfather, and I'm the proud owner now. It's my baby. I usually keep it parked in the driveway, where it's safe. It's not just a car, it's a family treasure. But today, something was about to happen that would turn my calm day upside down. I noticed a familiar blue SUV slowing down as it passed my house. The tires screeched slightly as it stopped right in front of my driveway. I looked up and saw none other than Karen, the HOA president, getting out of the vehicle with a clipboard in hand. I couldn't help but roll my eyes. Karen had always been a bit of a troublemaker when it came to anything that didn't fit her idea of what a neighborhood should look like. She'd been trying to enforce every little rule from the HOA, and it felt like she had something to say about everything. She walked right up to me with her nose high in the air. "You know," she started, "you can't park that old thing here. It's blocking the view of the street, and the HOA has a rule about not having junk cars in the neighborhood." I could barely believe what I was hearing. My Mustang? Junk? It was in perfect condition and wasn't blocking anyone's view. This wasn't the first time Karen had tried to pick a fight, but I had had enough. I tried to stay calm as I responded, "Karen, this isn't junk. It's my car, and it's staying right here." But Karen wasn't having it. "You've been warned before, and if it's not moved soon, I'll have it towed. You're violating HOA rules," she threatened, holding up her clipboard like a badge of authority. At that moment, I saw her grab her phone and start dialing. My heart sank, but I knew I couldn't just let her push me around. The thing was, I wasn't alone. My grandmother, who lived with me, had been watching the whole scene unfold from the front porch. She wasn't the kind of person to take anyone's nonsense. I turned to look at her, and that was when I knew Karen had picked the wrong fight. My grandma, a tough woman who had been through a lot in her life, wasn't about to let Karen ruin her grandson's Saturday. She had dealt with much bigger problems than Karen before, and I wasn't about to let some HOA bully mess with our family tradition. As Karen finished dialing the number, I saw my grandmother stand up from the porch with a determined look on her face. She walked toward us, slow but steady, and stood next to me. She might be in her late 70s, but when it came to standing up for what was right, she had the fire of someone half her age. "Excuse me, Karen," my grandma said in the calmest voice, "but you need to turn around and leave. We don't need you telling us what to do with our property. And if you even think about towing that car, you'll have to go through me first." Karen stopped dialing and turned to face my grandma, her face turning a little pale. "I'm sorry, but I've already called a tow truck. The HOA has the right to remove any cars that violate neighborhood rules." Grandma, without missing a beat, stepped closer to Karen and said, "If you think for 1 second that anyone is taking my grandson's car, you'll regret it. Not today, not ever." Karen seemed taken aback, her usual confidence shaken by my grandma's boldness. She stammered for a moment but quickly tried to regain her composure. "You can't threaten me. I'm on the HOA board, and I know the rules. You'll have to move that car or else." Grandma wasn't having any of it. "Listen here, Karen. You've been told. This is my grandson's car, and it stays where it is. Now, if you're done with your little power trip, I suggest you leave before I call someone who will really make you understand why you shouldn't mess with us." Karen stood there for a few moments, looking between my grandma and me. I could see her fuming, but she had nothing to say. She looked over at her car, then at the phone still in her hand, and with a deep breath, she turned around, got back in her SUV, and drove off without another word. My grandmother turned to me and smiled. "You know, that woman needs a lesson in respect. I'm glad you stood up to her, but I wasn't about to let her make you feel small." I couldn't help but laugh, feeling a surge of pride. Grandma had just saved my Mustang from being towed by the HOA's very own Karen. She might be a little old, but she was a force to be reckoned with. And as for Karen? Well, she wasn't going to forget this encounter anytime soon. The next few days were quiet, or at least, I thought they would be. Karen had been unusually silent, and I assumed that she had learned her lesson after being put in her place by my grandma. But I should have known better. HOA dramas don't just go away that easily. By Wednesday, I was coming back home from work, eager to relax, when I noticed a letter sticking out of my mailbox. It was an official-looking envelope with the HOA's logo at the top. I had a bad feeling about it, but I figured I would just deal with whatever it was. As I opened it, my stomach dropped. The letter was informing me that the HOA had decided to issue a formal complaint regarding my illegal parking of the Mustang and that they would be arranging a meeting to discuss the situation further. The letter made it sound like my classic car was a public nuisance and that I needed to remove it immediately or face penalties. I immediately knew that Karen was behind it. I couldn't believe she was taking this so far. I grabbed my phone and dialed Grandma's number. "Grandma, you're not going to believe this," I said, reading her the letter. "They're trying to get my car removed again." Grandma, of course, wasn't shocked at all. "You know what? Don't you worry about it. I'll handle it." I couldn't help but laugh. Grandma was a force of nature, and I knew that if she said she'd handle it, she would. "Are you sure? This feels like it's getting out of hand." "I'm sure. Let me just make a couple of calls," she replied, sounding more confident than I felt. Later that evening, Grandma sat me down and filled me in on what she had been up to. She had called a lawyer she knew through an old friend. The lawyer was someone who specialized in property rights and HOA disputes, so he was the perfect person to help us out. He'd already helped her with some legal issues in the past, and Grandma knew he was the best person for the job. The lawyer, a calm and composed man named Mr. Harper, promised us that we didn't need to worry about Karen's antics. He assured us that we were in the right. The HOA has no legal standing when it comes to private property issues like this, he explained. Your car is legally parked in your own driveway. They can't touch it. Grandma, being the fighter she was, wasn't letting anything slide. "I told you, they're not getting away with this. We're not moving the car, and Karen's going to learn that she can't push us around just because she's on the HOA board." The next day, we prepared for the HOA meeting. I couldn't believe we were doing this again. My stomach twisted at the thought of going up against Karen and the board, but I was glad to have Grandma and Mr. Harper in my corner. We gathered all the documents we needed, including the car's registration, proof that the driveway was mine, and any correspondence with the HOA. I even included photos of the Mustang, showing how it was parked legally and safely, not blocking anything. When the day of the meeting arrived, I was a nervous wreck. Grandma was as calm as ever, though. She wore her best "don't mess with me" face and told me not to worry. "We've got this," she said. The meeting was being held at the HOA office, and as we walked into the room, I could see the board members sitting around a large table. Most of them looked uncomfortable, glancing at each other nervously. But then I saw her. Karen. She was sitting at the head of the table, a smug look on her face as if she had already won. I could tell she was itching for a fight. Mr. Harper spoke first, calmly introducing himself and explaining our side of the situation. He laid out the facts. The Mustang was parked legally in my driveway, it wasn't violating any HOA rules, and Karen's complaints were unfounded. He also reminded them that the HOA had no jurisdiction over private property matters, especially when it came to something as personal as parking a car on one's own land. Karen, of course, didn't take this lying down. She jumped in with her usual attitude, trying to paint my Mustang as a public eyesore. "That car is too loud," she said. "It's old and unnecessary." It's lowering the property values in this neighborhood. But Grandma wasn't about to let her get away with that nonsense. She stood up and addressed the board, her voice firm and clear. Karen, you've been trying to push your agenda for months, and it's time someone put a stop to it. My grandson's car is a classic, and it's not hurting anyone. You don't get to dictate what we do with our own property. There was a moment of silence in the room. I could see a few of the board members nodding in agreement. Karen's smug expression faltered for just a second, but she quickly regained her composure. Still, she could tell the tide was turning. Mr. Harper continued, making sure to cover every point and showing that Karen was simply overstepping her boundaries. He was calm, cool, and collected, and it made all the difference. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that the board was not on Karen's side. They couldn't justify taking any action against me. As we left the meeting, Grandma gave me a big hug. Well, that was a piece of cake, wasn't it? I couldn't help but laugh. You're amazing, Grandma. I never thought we'd actually win this. She just smiled and said, we don't let people walk all over us. Not now, not ever. Karen wasn't done, though. I knew she would try something else, but for now, I felt like we had won. I wasn't going to let her ruin my love for that car, and with my grandma on my side, I knew I didn't have to worry. The days following the meeting were, for the most part, peaceful. Karen seemed to have backed off after our legal victory, and I thought we were finally in the clear. But as anyone who's dealt with an HOA knows, these things don't always end that easily. One afternoon, a couple of weeks later, I was out in the backyard, mowing the lawn, when I saw Karen's blue SUV again. This time, she was parked on the street, just a few houses down, watching my driveway intently. I stopped mowing and stared at her, feeling a mix of frustration and disbelief. Was she really back to try something else? I walked up to the front porch, trying to keep calm. Sure enough, Karen got out of her SUV and started walking toward my house with her usual confident, almost condescending stride. As she approached, I saw her clutching a piece of paper in her hand. My gut told me she wasn't just here for a friendly chat. Hey there, she called out in a falsely sweet voice. I'm sorry to bother you, but we really need to talk about your car again. I've received a few more complaints from the neighbors, and it's still not sitting well with the HOA board. I took a deep breath and looked over at Grandma, who had come to the door and was standing next to me, arms crossed. Her presence alone seemed to put Karen on edge. Karen, I said, trying to keep my cool, we've been through this. My car is staying right here, and there's nothing you or the HOA can do about it. Karen raised an eyebrow and held out the paper. Actually, this is a formal warning from the HOA. They're threatening legal action if the car isn't moved within the next week. You're violating zoning laws, and they're serious about taking it to court if necessary. I could see her smirking as if she had just delivered some knockout punch. But Grandma wasn't having it. You really think you can keep messing with us after everything that's happened? She asked, stepping forward. Her voice was calm, but there was a steeliness behind it that made Karen pause. Look, Karen, I don't know who's been feeding you all this nonsense, Grandma continued, but we've already dealt with this once. Your HOA has no legal grounds to force us to move the car. We've been through the proper channels, and we've won. You need to let this go. Karen's face turned red with frustration, but she wasn't backing down. I'm just doing my job, all right? You're making this difficult for everyone. You're breaking the rules, and someone has to stand up for the community. Grandma, never one to mince words, shot back, if you're really so concerned about the community, you should be worried about your own behavior. I've had enough of you trying to bully my family. I stood there, watching the exchange, amazed at how Grandma could handle Karen with such ease. The more Karen tried to argue, the more she lost control of the situation. She started pacing back and forth, looking like she was trying to find something new to throw at us. This isn't over, she said finally, glaring at us both. I'll make sure the HOA comes after you. You'll regret not listening to me. You'll do no such thing, Grandma said firmly. You've made your threats, and they've been empty. This time, you're going to leave, and you're going to leave us in peace. Karen's face twisted in anger, but after a moment of glaring at us, she turned and walked back to her SUV. I watched as she got in, slammed the door, and sped off, leaving a trail of dust behind her. That woman just doesn't get it, Grandma muttered, shaking her head. But we've got the law on our side, and we're not backing down. I turned to her and said, "Thank you again, Grandma. I honestly don't know what I'd do without you." Grandma gave me a wink. "You'd be fine. But I'm not going to let anyone push you around, especially not over a silly car. This neighborhood may be full of rules, but some rules are meant to be broken." That was the last time Karen tried anything. For the next few weeks, the neighborhood was quiet, and I finally had some peace of mind. I kept my Mustang parked in the driveway, as always, and went about my daily life without worrying about Karen or the HOA. One evening, as I was washing the Mustang, I saw a neighbor walk by. He waved at me, smiling. "I heard about all the trouble with Karen and the car," he said. "Honestly, you're lucky to have someone like your grandma around. I've seen her stand up to people, and she's got a way of making them back down." I smiled back and said, "Yeah, I don't think Karen will be bothering us again anytime soon." As the months went by, Karen seemed to disappear from our lives. The HOA stopped sending letters, and the neighborhood felt a little more relaxed. No one ever brought up the Mustang again, and every time I took it out for a drive, I couldn't help but think of how close we came to losing it. But in the end, thanks to Grandma, I knew that no one would ever take my car from me.